When you're called upon to give expert testimony concerning issues in the case, sometimes you're called upon to give a wide variety of opinions, and sometimes you're called upon to give a very narrowly tailored opinion as to perhaps a single topic or
Yes,
subject.
I think that's fair to say.
And in this case, you were retained to give testimony in the state of Nevada versus Robert Tellis.
Correct.
Did I reach out to you in reference to this case?
No, I believe that I was originally retained on this case by the defense investigator.
Okay, and that was
reached
prior
out
to
to
my
me.
involvement, to your knowledge, in this matter.
That's my understanding, yes.
You were called upon to review certain evidence in this case to give testimony concerning suicide attempts for those that are involving charges or
Yes.
facing charges.
That's correct.
Let's talk about this. Individuals who may be charged with a crime attempting to commit suicide. How common is it?
Well, first of all, it's hard to say because there's a lot of people that go into custody, but it's not very common. I think it's fair to say that it's probably less than 1 in 1,000 suspects or defendants who are involved in the criminal justice system. So it's not particularly common, but it is more common than it is in the general public. So people who are involved in the criminal justice system do commit suicide or attempt suicide at a higher rate than the general public.
Are there risk factors that have been identified by peer-reviewed scientific research on this issue?
Well, yes. One of the risk factors that has been identified is the severity of the crime, the severity of the charge. So if somebody is accused of a particularly severe charge, then the risk for suicide or an attempted suicide is higher.
Fair to say that the severity of a murder charge is about as serious as it can get.
I would think so.
Is an attempted suicide a reliable indicator of a guilty conscience?
Not necessarily, no.
And is that based upon research?
Yes.
And if you could explain this issue.
So in 2011, there was a study published of a very comprehensive research project where they looked at over 27,000 suicides that were committed by individuals who were involved in the criminal justice system. And then they compared those individuals to over 500,000 individuals who were also involved in the criminal justice system but did not commit suicide, so that they could identify, well, what makes these people a little bit different than the people who didn't commit suicide. First of all, I think it probably is obvious that individuals who came in with a mental health problem were already at higher risk because those are the people that typically commit suicide. So it wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with whether they're being charged or not, but it's clear from the research that the stress of being accused of a crime, particularly a severe crime, as I said, can cause people to commit or attempt suicide, whether they're guilty or not. And for the study that I reference, for instance, found that there were people who had gone through the system, were adjudicated not guilty, and after their case was done, they were still at a higher risk for suicide. Other people who had their cases dropped but had still been accused of this crime were at a higher risk for suicide. So it was clear from the study that it's more the process of being involved in the criminal justice system, being accused of a crime, that produces the stress that can result in suicide than guilty conscience itself. And I should add, part of the problem that even addressing that question of guilty conscience is that Remember I said earlier about what psychology is and it isn't. It's about behavior, it's not about mental processes. So to accurately answer that question, we would have to know what's in the brain of the individual. Guilty conscience, by definition, regards what's going on inside, not what the person is doing. And so we can't, there are going to be many, many cases where we don't know if the person is guilty or not. So it becomes difficult to answer that question. But we do know that some people, even after they have been found not guilty by the system, just being involved in the system is a suicide risk.
And just so we're clear, you're not called upon to give testimony concerning the guilt or innocence of Mr. Tellis?
No, of course not.
That's obviously within the purview of this jury and not yours.
Absolutely.
So just so I'm clear on your testimony, if a person attempts to commit suicide after being accused of the crime, that doesn't mean that they probably did.
It's not a reliable indicator, no.
Innocent people, or people that have been exonerated of a very serious crime, have attempted suicide.
Yes,
You are aware that Mr. Tellis cut his arms pretty severely in this case.
I am.
Did you have an opportunity to discuss this issue with Mr. Tellis?
I did.
Did he express to you concerns that he had at the time that he did this?
Objection, hearsay.
Was his explanation to you consistent with the studies that you have just referred to?
Objection, hearsay.
It's hearsay.
Again, you have given testimony concerning these studies where a person gets accused, and as a result of the accusation and the process, not necessarily guilt, but the accusation and the process, that person attempted suicide.
Yes.
And that attempted suicide does not necessarily mean a guilty conscience.
Correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can I have some sort of overview of what you reviewed in preparation for your testimony this morning?
Certainly. I was sent the discovery from the case, which I believe included the police report, which essentially documents the investigative process that the police went through when they were assigned to this case. I think that also included some hospital records for the defendant when he was hospitalized immediately after his arrest because of the injuries to his
Sure.
arms. I think I saw some photos that were related to the case, and I was also provided with medical records for the defendant during his time in custody at Clark County Detention Center.
Okay. And in terms of the police reports, you mentioned that you had we call it the OR, the officer's report. Is that what you're referring to?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. How about any witness statements? Have you reviewed any of those?
I believe there were witness statements in there as well, yes.
Okay. And then did you review photographs associated with the case?
As I mentioned earlier, yes.
Video?
Don't recall seeing any video.
DNA reports?
I think I saw some DNA reports, yes.
Reports from like phone extractions, anything like that?
I think I saw a log of some phone records, so I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to.
I'm talking more like the contents of a phone?
I don't recall seeing that, but that doesn't mean I didn't.
Okay. And when was it that you were provided these materials?
It was some time ago. I was retained on this case, I believe, late last year, but I couldn't tell you the exact date.
Okay. And it sounds like you interviewed Mr. Tellis at some point?
I did.
When was that?
I actually interviewed him twice. I interviewed him earlier this year, I believe, and then I also interviewed him last Saturday.
Okay. And in either interview, did you record your conversation with him?
I did not.
Did you take notes?
I did.
Are your notes available?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, do you still have your notes?
Yes,
Okay, so if the court ordered you to provide them, you could do that?
I could, yes.
Okay. And you understand, of course, we don't have them yet.
I haven't been asked for them, no.
Okay. And so if we made that request and the court agrees with us, you'd be able to provide it?
Certainly.
Okay. Besides Mr. Tellis, did you interview anyone else?
I did not.
How long were the interviews that you conducted with him?
The first interview was about 3 hours, I believe, and then the more recent one was maybe an hour and a half.
Okay. Did you ever administer any tests to him?
I did not.
So it was just interviews, and so you're sort of relying on his description of events?
Well, I mean, I captured his description of events.
Okay. But what he's telling you is his factual version, right?
I would assume so.
Okay. I mean, you don't ever verify that with anybody else, is that
I
fair?
have not.
Okay. And so you're kind of getting information from a single source?
Well, I'm getting information from him for the information that he has available to him.
Okay. And like you could apply, I mean, sometimes are tests administered in order to do psychological assessments of people?
Correct.
And none of those were done
No,
on either occasion?
no.
Okay. And you're not here to tell us anything about events that occurred on December the 2nd of 2022, correct?
Well, no.
No. I mean,
Not-
you
not
haven't.
on that date, no.
You haven't been to Bronze Circle?
Counsel, I believe it's September 2nd. There was a question, December 2nd. I think.
Oh, I thought I said
Just a
September. I
mistake, no
apologize. I mean September, if I misspoke.
Yes, no,
I mean, you haven't been to Bronze Circle.
no.
You're not familiar with any of the evidence other than what you read in the officer's report?
Whatever I read in the police report, yes.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that, you sometimes testify like about the reliability of memory and that sort of thing, and that is sometimes used in cases where there is eyewitness testimony to be relied upon.
Yes,
And then sometimes I would assume it's to talk about like children who recall instances of sexual abuse that occurred in the past. They're challenging their memories of that.
that's right.
And so you kind of provide, I guess, context to how they might misremember things.
In some cases, yes.
Okay. And I think you said on direct examination that that going through the criminal justice system just in itself is a stressful event,
Yes, certainly.
and that correlates with the severity of the charge.
The risk of suicide correlates with the severity of the charge, yes.
Okay. And what we're saying is, I think you said it doesn't, I think your words were not necessarily when asked if it was, like the suicidality was indicative of a guilty conscience, correct?
Yes,
And so not necessarily to me means sometimes it could be?
sure, of
Okay.
course.
So there are sometimes people are suicidal because of feeling guilty about the crime they've committed?
I think that's almost certainly true.
Okay. Do you have any kind of information, I don't know if there are studies on that, about how often that might be the case?
Well, because, as I said earlier, we don't know what's going through a person's mind in most cases unless they tell us.
Right.
People that commit suicide don't usually have much to say.
Right, but if
And
you
so-
attempted it, you
Right,
would.
and even when they tell us, we can't always rely on that as being accurate. So it's a very difficult question to address directly through scientific study.
Because people who have attempted suicide may be unreliable narrators about why they did things, right?
Absolutely,
And they may be self-interested when they're relaying events to you.
for sure.
And they may be motivated by sort of wanting to avoid criminal responsibility when they're talking to you.
Yes, definitely.
All those factors are always at play when you have someone charged with a crime. Would
They
that be
can
fair?
They can be.
Okay. And do you think there's a correlation of suicidality when people, like in high positions in society, have what's called like a fall from grace? Do you know what I mean? Being publicly embarrassed?
Yes, I think that that's probably a factor because when I talk about the stress of being accused of a crime, whether or not you did it, there are a lot of factors that play into that. There's family, there's friends, there's finances, there's your employment, but also, as you said, if it's somebody who has a prominent position in society, just the public scrutiny of being accused, whether you're guilty or not, is sometimes inescapable. And we see cases of that all the time where people are accused of a crime, they're tried, they're found not guilty, but that scrutiny, that public scrutiny continues. Not everybody accepts a not guilty verdict, and so it can be very difficult to function in society afterwards.
But that public scrutiny would still exist and the embarrassment would still exist if you were guilty too, right?
Right.
And if, say, you were the subject of really negative articles that were published countywide, that would be a stressor that someone might experience as well, right?
Correct.
Being accused of inappropriate behavior in the workplace would be a stressor for somebody, right?
I would think so.
Being accused of being a bad manager would be stressful for somebody, right?
Almost certainly.
Okay. And sort of being accused of being kind of incompetent at your job would be a stressor if that was something that was like published to, say, the county.
Yes.
Okay. And those types of things cause stress on individuals that may or may not manifest as suicide, but they're troubling to individuals to experience. Is that fair?
Sure, some more than others. It's all about personality and experience, but yes, I would think generally that's true.
And when you say some more than others, if they're someone who puts a lot of importance on their role in a particular office or status, it would be more upsetting for that type of person to have maybe negative articles written about them?
I would think so, yes.
Okay. Could I have the court's indulgence? Thank you.
Yes, just some follow-up. Based upon your testimony and your opinion, there's not really this correlation concerning more evidence against someone for a serious crime then results in a higher likelihood of suicide.
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question?
Absolutely. So there was questions that you were asked concerning evidence in a particular case. And are you able to say there's any correlation between, let's say, the more evidence of a person having committed a crime, that being correlated to the higher likelihood of suicide?
I think it's probably more accurate to say that it comes down to the individual's perception of his situation. So, for instance, if someone believes that they're in big trouble, that the cops have them dead to rights, whether or not they're guilty, that probably produces more stress than somebody who thinks, I can get out of this, or I'm good, or they don't have anything on me. So the objective status of that person's situation is probably less important than the subjective perception of the situation that they're in.
So again, that underscores, obviously you agree that human beings, we can be fairly complex and our behavior can be
Yeah, I
fairly
think that's
complex.
pretty obvious, yeah.
It is, and oftentimes people think, well, if this person committed suicide, if he committed suicide, he must have committed the crime. You're here to dispel that common view.
Yes,
And there's actually scientific data that does so.
right.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Any class?
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hawks.